Sekali karena pada program pertama ini kita akan kita kedatangan seorang profesor, seorang feminis dan yang menyebut dirinya anti-rasis. Nanti silakan ditanya apa itu maksudnya. Adalah Ibu Zillah Eisenstein dari Universitas Ithaca, New York. Dan dalam diskusi yang akan dipandu oleh Dewi Chandraningrum. Dewi Chandraningrum mengajar di UN Universitas Muhammadiyah Surakarta. Dan kita tahu Dewi juga seorang feminis, sekarang menjadi redaktur di jurnal perempuan. Nanti diskusi akan berlangsung dalam bahasa Inggris, tetapi kalau saudara-saudara ingin bertanya dalam bahasa Indonesia, dipersilakan. Nanti mungkin Dewi atau beberapa teman bisa mencoba menerjemahkannya. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. His Excellency, the U.S. Ambassador for the Asian countries. Zillah Eisenstein, thank you for coming to Serambi, Salihara. This is our first program in the year 2012, and we are very happy to have you here, and we will have a discussion. The title of this discussion is a bit intriguing for Indonesian because it's like trafficking gender from Bronx to Jakarta. We shall see what this topic is about. But Zillah Eisenstein is professor in the Ithaca University, and the discussion will be moderated by Dewi Chandraningrum. Dewi Chandraningrum is also a feminist. Yeah, he teach at Universitas Muhammadiyah Surakarta, and she is now editor board of the Jurnal Perempuan or Women's Journal.
Tomorrow and the days after tomorrow, we are going to have more coffins. We have migrant workers coming from the Arab Saudi as well as Malaysia. They are being sent home, not alive, but in coffins. So the airport is basically a torture for us. So the airport is basically a place of pain, a place of agony, because the women, the migrant workers being sent home are beheaded, are tortured. They are not home alive, although they have sent the highest income to Indonesia. So everyone, I am a woman here. I was once being divorced and previously for many times being tortured, being subdued, being subordinated as well. And I'm sure that every person in this room has experienced the same thing as well. And the tortures, the pains are gems, jewelries. The scars are jewelries. So the jewelries are books, like what we have here. We have a jewelry here. And the books that she wrote, lots, describing that. The audacity of races and genders, a personal and global story of the Obama campaign, 2009. Sexual decoys, gender, race, and war in Imperial Democracy, 2007. Against Empire, 2004. ManMade Breast Cancer, 2001. Hatred, Racialized and Sexualized Conflict in the 21st Century, 1996. Global Obscenity, Patriarchy, Capitalism, and the Lure of Cyberfantasy, 1998. So that's the scars, that's the gems, that's the jewelry. So beautiful. Everyone, here is Professor Zillah Eisenstein, teaching at the Ithaca College, New York. Here is a summary of her biography. Throughout her career, her books have tracked the rise of neoliberalism both within the US and across the globe. She has documented the demise of liberal democracy and scrutinized the growth of imperial and militarist globalization. She has also written criticism about the attack on the affirmative action in the US, the masculinist bias of the law, the crisis of breast cancer and AIDS, the racism of patriarchy, and the patriarchal structuring of race, the new nationalism and corporatist multiculturalism. So let us welcome her, please.
Terima kasih for knowing enough English to let me speak here tonight. And if you feel like there's a word that or a phrase that I'm using that is not clear to you, please just raise a hand. And the whole idea is to share some ideas this evening. So across the barrier of language and the difficulties of speaking in a world where there are too many borders that inhibit us sharing our thoughts. What I want to do tonight is to share some of my newest thinking, what I want to call some big ideas that I'm not really all that sure about, but I am sure that we need to be thinking about them. In other words, I do not have answers for some of the questions, but I actually think the world that we are in today means that we need to find the questions that need the answers, okay? So, before I quite begin, there are some big ideas I would like to clear the air with to let you know what preoccupies me just now about the fantastic changes in women and girls' lives that are at the heart of global politics. The wars, the painful humiliations, the hunger, the devastation. More often than not, women are not understood as the movers and the shakers of the globe because so few of us are in the places of power. Instead of putting the shiftings and the shapings of gender as critical to understanding the crisis of the globe, alongside global warming and global hunger, women and girls are pocketed away as victims of this system, especially sometimes in the stories of sexual trafficking. So let me just throw out a few of my ideas that I think are true, but until we really think about them, we aren't going to know. So here are just a few thoughts, and then I'll make a kind of argument that's little and not so big, and then we can see what you think and we can talk about it some, okay? So, number one, gender trafficking does not sound as sexy as sex trafficking, but it's present nonetheless in all of the selling of labor. Sex, paid domestic labor, unpaid domestic labor, wage labor, the collecting of wood, the hauling of water, the renting of wombs. Number two, sex always brings gender and also color and class with it, but it romps around the globe as though it's on its own and therefore not there at all. In other words, so often the fact that it is girls and women who are really the new workers of the global economy, or what we could call the newest proletariat, or the newest proletariats in the plural, all right? That the idea here is that people talk about workers and assume that they remain as men. And so not the fact that the global economy isn't made of male and female workers, but why is it that female workers remain invisible in the way that it is thought about? Women and girls, this is number 3. Women and girls are the newest of the new laborers, while also being the oldest of the old. So their unique presence appears normal and natural, and it's neither. Okay? So in other words, so much of what happens right now that is political is said to be natural and therefore normal. And actually, I think so much that happens is abnormal and not natural, and ultimately political. Number 4, the latest data in the United States says that women are leaving the bottom layer jobs in our labor force and seeking educations in order so they can get better jobs. Men are very discouraged. They are either staying in low-paying jobs or are unemployed and no longer working. This is the new adaptability, flexibility of people's labor, women's labor, and men's newest gendering. So part of what I am asking you to think about tonight, and I'm sure many of you have thought about this, is that there is an important distinction to be made between sex as the actual biological body. So when you look at someone, you see someone as female or male. And I'm arguing here that gender is really something very different. It is connected to that meaning of female and male, but that gender is the meaning given to that. So in other words, you can be looking at someone you think is female and you may not know their gender. Now, what do I mean by that? The gendered meaning of their labor in a very transitional period of history, okay? In many, this is number 5, in many of the poorest countries, women and girls are said to be docile and therefore easily used for the worst paying and slaving jobs. I'm asking you to think about, rather than docile or passive, they are fierce. They will stop at nothing to do what must be done. Number 6, the World Bank says that if you invest in women, you are investing in the whole nation and therefore the whole globe. That women bring others and their families and therefore the nation with them when they improve economically. Said from a slightly different viewpoint, women and their labor are the ones who move and shake the world. Number 7, many Islamic radicals in Iran, Indonesia, Pakistan, Afghanistan are veiling women in the hopes of controlling them. I rather think that niqabs and burqas tell the story of women's enormous potential power, not their lack of it. In other words, the struggle over the meaning of the veil and Islamic women today is a struggle because of the powerfulness of women in Islam and Islamic feminisms. If it didn't exist, you wouldn't need to bother so much with trying to have control over what the meanings of the female body, particularly in Muslim countries, are. Number 8, right-wing Republicans and radicals in the United States say no to abortion and to women's dignity, while they give new license to all kinds of sexual infidelities. The radical right across the globe knows the consequences of women's changing transnational genders and families. What else could explain the hypocrisy of today? In other words, when so many of us wonder, how is it possible to have so many different meanings that seem to make no sense about really what is happening in the world, whether it is about sex or gender or color or class. My point here is that the hypocrisy and the not understanding is really a moment to say that we are in a crisis stage of what could be called, and this would be a term used by astrophysicists, okay, in quotes here, singularity, that we are in a moment of singularity, which means what? That there has been small change going on since the early 1970s and the beginning of the new global capitalism, and that we now are at a moment where maybe just about now, pretty soon, nothing before will look like anything that we really knew what it meant at this point. So in other words, it is for you to think about the enormous changes, the slowness in which change happens, that we all have lived with our own lives for the last several decades, and yet at some moment, those changes really become so uniquely powerful that they come to have new meaning. And I'm asking you to particularly think about that in terms of what you think sex and gender might mean at this moment. I also think that female bodies are being used in the global economy in brilliant ways. You know, brilliant, are we together? Just extraordinarily, you know, creative ways, meaning that it becomes really difficult to know what it means, okay? So you can have women who are sexually trafficked, you can have women who are actually the new military in many of the countries of this world. And then the question becomes, and you can have women who are in incredible positions of power, and then you have most of us where power is lessened and the difficulty of living on this globe has increased. Well, I kind of went into number 9. It's the way I do it. So 9, and I did 9.
Sorry.
I don't know exactly where it began when I was doing it, but that's okay. Okay. So now what I'd like to do is just share a couple of more particular ideas, and then come back to what I was thinking about when I said from the Bronx to Jakarta. Okay? Indonesian domestic workers migrate most often to Malaysia and Saudi Arabia. They migrate to a nation of gender apartheid in Saudi Arabia. And I think it's really interesting that why do we not have a boycott like we did against South Africa for racial apartheid? We have a nation that practices gender apartheid, yet we send laborers there. Countries have dealings with them, etc. So in this process, the domestic workers, as the new migrants, they carry with them a gendered story of colonialism, and with colonialism, a gendered story of misogyny. These women carry their economic class inequities with them, and further weave a series of differences and inequalities between themselves and the females of the households they are employed within. So there is something new here. As you have more women who have improved their lives economically and have become members of the middle class or classes above working and poor, those women, those families are hiring domestic laborers from poor countries where there are no other options for jobs. So what is interesting here is that although you still have the construct of women as a gendered group that are defined in terms of domestic labor, you have a new differentiation within this gendered group of what? Different economic classes of women defined by the new structuring of this labor, okay? So when people talk about the new global economy, they usually say that it's transnational corporation and transnational as opposed to what? The nation state, right? That the nation is being recarved, both economically and politically. My point here is, so is the family structure. As you have new forms of labor, you now have transnational families. You have mothers who are no longer living in the same country with the children that they have birthed. So the point here again is to recognize the political significance here that of the nation is always being defined in relationship to family structure. If you have trans nations, you have trans families. And I would even say there is a new construct here to be thinking about, and that would be the new construct of a transnational motherhood. Now, if that sounds strange and uncomfortable, well, it is, and particularly if you are what? Maybe one of the children who has what? A transnational mother. All right? You're supposed to start nodding your heads and saying that you're at least with me a little bit, okay?
Yes,
so, okay. All right, so whenever my voice starts getting loud, I usually think that I need to be clearer, and I realize getting loud doesn't do that, so I'll just calm down again. Now, the other point of these constructions, if I could just also make a comparison to during the period of chattel slavery and the slavery that was really part of the economy that built the United States. Chattel slavery was a point in time where everyone who was black was a slave, and everyone who was black and a slave was poor, okay? Then what you have is you have the development of an economy that starts to do what? Starts to really need a new racial system. You have new economic categories as slavery is no longer legal, and you have economic differentiations here along class lines. So you have a new complexity of the racial system. I'm arguing something similar at a different historical period, which is to say that the system of patriarchy, the gendered system of female labor, is becoming more differentiated, and therefore many people want to say that patriarchy is not part of the global economy. And I'm arguing it is part, but in new, modernized, even what is said to be democratic form. Okay, so this would be some of the questioning and concern. So nations do not remain as they once were. Countries are carved anew, and the global economy disregards national borders, as well as disregarding gender and racial borders as well. Okay? So in other words, to try to see what then the new borders, how they are defined and what they mean. So 21st century global capitalism creates the new with the old and modernizes systems of gender apartheid that no longer are in apartheid form. So the point here again is we have a decoy status where it is unclear what once formulated political meanings meant. The global working class was never predominantly white, but it was really historically, it was men of color. Today, it is predominantly girls and women of color. It is the migrant and displaced labor of women and girls of color doing the international transfer of care, domestic work, nursing, nannies, and other forms of sex labor. The care-related occupations develop with the growth of the new middle classes of the globe. So when people see the growth of the middle class is in different countries across the globe, the argument here is that there are other processes happening that really are not democratic and are not progressive. Now this is a question then, given what I've said. So is it that global capital regenders and maybe ungendered labor while re-sexing it? Okay, so I'm going to do that one more time to just make you think about it, you know. And whatever you start to think it means, it's better than not thinking about it. That was really my point, okay? Global capital regenders and maybe ungenders labor while resexing it. This does not mean that greater equality exists for women and girls, but it does mean that there is more fluidity in the structures of sex and gender than possibly ever before. In sum here, countries are more racially diverse and mixed than they used to be during colonialism. That's going back to my historical relationships here. They're more racially diverse and mixed than they used to be during colonialism, when the mother country often remained white. Today, a country like the US is richly colored and racially diverse, with people from all over the globe. As well, gender today is also more differentiated and complex. Although women have always inhabited countries in a way that multiple races have not, the spaces women occupy have become more differentiated in the labor markets. So then the question is, what do these changes mean? And so what has changed or not? And that's where the discussion, or just a thought about from Jakarta to the Bronx comes in. Now in July 2011, Ruyati Binti Sapubi, the Indonesian housewife, was executed by beheading, as was mentioned earlier, by Saudi authorities after the Supreme Court there ordered the death penalty for her. On the other side of the globe, although not similar, but definitely connected to a similar system of gender differentiation, you have Dominique Strauss-Kahn, the former head of the International Monetary Fund, charged with assaulting a domestic worker at the Sochito Hotel, an immigrant worker, just coming from different directions here. But the point here is that the movement and the migrancy of women's labor as domestics whether it is paid in hotels or paid in people's private homes, the question of the sexual violation and the inadequate systems of protection and power that exist at the very same time that the globe is promising a new form of gender equity. So what I'm trying to say here is some things are changing a lot and some things are staying very much more the same. If we don't see the distinction between sex trafficking and gender trafficking, it's hard to really see the complexity of this problem. And what I am also in this conversation trying to speak to is the fact that there, across many differences, that there are enormous connections and similarities between the migrant workers, women workers in Indonesia going to other countries, and women coming from other countries into the United States or into other Western countries, that what is a continuity here is a problem of the way that labor and sexuality and sexual exploitation become combined and recombined in problematic fashion. So in other words, the politics of sex has changed less than the politics of gender, that the sexual decoy makes it harder to see the different layerings of this system of power, and that therefore often the connections and the cohesion that exists among women across the globe, across the differences, are often not recognized and seen. So I just want to conclude with one other example here of the United States Supreme Court. There was a suit that went all the way to our major court by the women of Walmart. Do you know Walmart? The transnational corporation? The store, yes. And so 1.5 million women in the United States charged Walmart with violating their rights as women for not having been promoted, for having had different kinds of sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, etc. And although it was on the basis of technical law, the Supreme Court said that the suit that these 1.5 million women were bringing was not valid, and that they were not recognized as a viable class. Okay, meaning that they did not share. The decision of our Supreme Court said that the women who worked at Walmart had too many differences among them, in terms of the jobs that they held, etc., to say that they all shared something alike. All right? So my point here is that the women across the globe have many differences, and we do have enough that we share alike to be a sexual class that demands equality and freedom and democracy in the new global economy. Thank you.
The newest of the new year, the newest of the new, the newest group of the labor, the newest restructuring of the global capital, and also the transnational family, the transnational migrant worker, and also the imprint of the old patriarchy is still there. And the category is linking to each other. Okay, now we welcome responses. Please.
Nama saya Alicia. I'm a PhD student in Gender Studies in London.
Okay.
Okay. I'm particularly intrigued by the concept of transnational motherhood. I like that concept very much. Thank you. My question is, what do you really mean when you say that global capital ungenders, regenders, and resexes, and thereby making the category of gender and sex more fluid? Because you see, it's been a project of feminism to break the rigidity of the categories of sex and gender, and eventually breaking sexism, transphobia, and homophobia. So perhaps we're talking a different language here, because you're more interested in labor and transnational capital and things like that. But how does global capital achieve this when feminism till now cannot? So what does the fluidity of gender, in your terms, the fluidity of gender and sex look like on the ground? Thank you.
The sex and gender, I think that the idea that they are static categories was always wrong. I mean, there are many different kinds of feminisms, so some feminisms have had it more static than others, but the idea that sexuality and gender are performed, okay, and that they can then be performed and understood in many different fashions. One can be female and identify or be identified in masculinist ways. So my point is that at this stage of the game, it seems to me that if we don't understand as well that even for male bodies, maleness is coming to have new meanings because there are different historical necessities about how wars are made. Women now are in the military forces in the United States at a great level, primarily, but there was real shortage of men for the military. So again, the point of identifying certain practices or certain performances as tied to one kind of sexual body, it seems to me that we will not be able to understand the newest political formations without understanding them. It's hard to challenge them. So I think that that's really the nub of the issue. And when I talk about labor, I really don't separate that from the issues of sexuality, heterosexuality, etc. I mean, I think that they are complicit with each other all the time.
Thank you.
Yeah. By you, please.
Well, basically, I have.
Oh yes, please. I give the time to you.
Yes, you were talking about the migrant workers. In this country, I'm sorry, your idea is not fit for this country because we have so many jobless, and also the migrant workers are supported by the president of Indonesia. So that I'm sorry that it's not really fit for this country that you're talking about. And this, what kind of action you will take then if it is like this in Indonesia? Thank you.
Sorry, Ibu, the name?
My name is Tutika Kelatu. Thank you. From Gelandangan.
That's the newest year. The newest year.
I'm not sure I understood your point. I know that migrant workers have been recognized as being the source of revitalizing the economy to a degree. But my point is that I don't think that recognition, that's part of what I would call a decoy statement. It's not, I mean, it's not recognizing rights, it's not recognizing protections. It hasn't said to Saudi Arabia, you know, certain limitations. I mean, there was a halt for a while, but I was told that has changed. But
several sentences again. I don't agree with the migrant workers also, but the situation is just like against your talking. So my question is, what is the action then? Your action to stop them? Work action or whatever you call it. Thank you. Because we have a liberal democracy here in this country also. Thank you.
sure, go ahead.
Okay, I would like to share experience, share a story to you. Yesterday I was from Jakarta. I was from Jakarta, and I became one of the panelists of the dialogue of the mayor, the city mayor, yeah, the city mayor to be 4 of them, and then we have a visit as well to the Mount Muria, yeah. The teak trees are simply disappeared. 42,000 hectares of the land are simply disappeared. And a cohort and a flock of migrant workers then going to the Saudi Arabia. So that's also the problem, that they have already also lose the natural resources where they used to depend on previously. So that's the story from part of the Indonesian migrant workers. Or would you like to add some more? No? Okay, that's wonderful. Yeah, well, we are going to do something, every person in this room, for sure. Yeah, they are activists, feminists, academicians. So today, this evening, we are doing something as well. I'm learning a lot from you.
I'm from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, but this is my own opinion. I would like to know more about the concept that you mentioned regarding the ungender and resexes, because I believe in certain cultures, like in Indonesia, in South Sulawesi, especially in Makassar, they recognize 5 different genders, which is more than male men and female women. They also recognize the masculine, female biological, and then they recognize also a feminine male biological, and they have the certain one called bisu, who is a male biological who has feminine side, and they have certain powers. And it's actually from the traditional wisdoms itself, we actually recognize varieties of genders itself. It seems that so-called quote-unquote modernizations is actually the one who make them have to choose between female women and male men. So, and then crossing to the globalizations, and in which you call the gender trafficking from Bronx to Jakarta, it's actually what I'm currently conclude so far is actually only mention those 2 genders, only the male men and the female women. Well, actually in the local cultures there are many interpretations about genders, and in Thailand, for example, they already recognize the she-males. Formally, they recognize the male bodies in the feminine side in the labor courts, in public toilets, in the school. So before we move on to how this gender playing in the international labors and globalizations, it's actually, if we look on the traditional sides, we have rich interpretations of the gender itself and how we don't look at the biological side of human bodies. So that's my point.
Construct, the dichotomized construct that I was using is the one that is the political narrative of the globe. I totally appreciate the multiplicity of genders that, you know, in terms of many cultures in Africa as well have, you know, anywhere between 5 and 14. And the idea that that there are only 2 genders, it's, you know, that's a party system, it's not sex, you know. So now I didn't know the particular name of the group that you were first talking about. Yes, okay. So, but it seems to me that your point just enriches the idea that that the ungendering of the bipolarity, okay, we could say that that's already in process, but not in terms of the ruling narrative. No? Well, but I'm so glad that you brought up the issue that the richness of the multiplicity of genders is in so many cultures, and actually many of them rooted pre-modern, in quotes, and the whole idea that it's with modernity came heterosexism and the bipolarity of gender. So.
Because I'm still not sure, I still don't understand the ungender and resexist, because we actually already had it before, and then because of this modernizations, we just have this bipolarity that I think if you mentioned the political narrative, so I think it makes sense.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay, the ruling narrative, yeah? The ruling narrative, okay.
Fitri from State University of Jakarta.
Okay, thank you, please.
I want to ask you about male, since gender is also about male. And do you think that man changed in global economy? And is there any different class economic emerge in globalization that is from male side? Like you mentioned that there is a new class of female worker. For example, you mentioned that women who become middle class and they hire woman from ruler, and gender in female, gender in woman economy become more classified. And I want to ask you, is that kind of thing also happen in men and male? Do you think male also experience that woman also experience, like is there any other kind of use body, male body usage differently? For example, you said that woman body being used in creative way. Does it also happen in male? And what kind of it? And what do you think? I don't know whether you're observe Korean drama Korean, or Korean band, for example. Now if I watch them, I have difficulty in identifying whether they're male or female. Do you think is that a part of global economy? Or is that only happen in Asia, for example? And how do we have to explain this kind of things? I mean, does a very feminine male now legally exist, for example?
That is my question.
They are fluid. They are fluid differently. And the history of masculinity and the male body, it has its own trajectory. What I do think is interesting, but I'm not really ready to say a whole lot about it yet, is that clearly as the global economy right now has really started to define new positions for women. That is also true for men. It does seem like some of the privileges of maleness that were tied to the economy, and that's not the only privilege that exists, but to the extent that that does, I do think that men's privileges are being renegotiated because there is always a relationship between maleness and femaleness. So I don't think one is static and the other is fluid. I do think that they function with different purposes, and I also think that some of the instability, like in the United States right now, after the 2008 economic crisis, more men lost their jobs than women lost jobs. It's only within the last month that men are back as the majority workers in the United States, but for the first time ever, females in 2009 were the majority workers in the United States. So does that start to affect the concept that male is worker, woman is in the home? Of course it does. You know, does it affect it totally? Absolutely not, because misogyny and all ideas are very sticky. They stay around much longer than they are true. So I do think there's a lot to try to figure out here about the new configurations, and it would involve what is happening to males as well.
Thank you. My name is Ruli. I'm a master graduate student from Cultures and Development from Belgium. This is a very actually interesting topic. Thank you for bringing the topic in this forum. I would like to narrow first my question into household worker, especially Indonesian household worker and abroad. And I would like to specify my question into more cultural context, if it's possible. Well, this is my, let's say, it's my subjective opinion, and I think it's very debatable. Household workers in Indonesia, I think we have to put it in the cultural context, where the workers who stay at the family, she becomes the member of the families, so that the family treat the workers the same as the other family members. That's actually my experience. And then when these workers are brought into the international labor market, let's say they are sent to Saudi Arabia or to any other countries, that this cultural perspective are also brought into the international market, which is actually for me quite, it doesn't fit very well. When these workers try to be or wanted to be recognized as the part of the family, where the family abroad, they don't recognize them as the member of the family. So, and the result is there are so many abuse of the workers, and if it's brought into the more brought into the global economic context, then we finally forget about this cultural context from the basic. So this actually, I just want to share this my opinion with you, and because from your thoughts that you have just mentioned at the previous sessions. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't state, or you didn't explain about it.
So is actually, how do you see, or how big do you see the relations between cultural contexts of the domestic workers itself into the migrant global market? Do you see that this perspective is very important to, let's say, to explain about what's going on in this global labor market?
Well, I do. I mean, I've written about the concept that I call global. Okay, that it's global, that it's global and local at the same time. So I do. Of course, the cultural has a place, but the tension between the structural requisites of global constructs and the constructs of any particular culture, that there will be a tension. I think that's not to deny that we don't live globally. We live locally. I mean, it is simultaneous, and that is also part of the reason why I think there is as much dissonance at the moment, because you have to try to make sense of that. You really don't have a choice to live in one or the other. I don't think. So, although we all try our best to do how that seems most effective. So.
Yeah, because what I see that the most problems that is happening in the migrant workers abroad, we can explain actually based on the cultural context. So, for example, in Belgium itself, they have a problem with migrants. They have problem with not just labor migrants, but migrants in general. And what I see is actually it's the lack of understanding of the cultural context of the immigrant and the labor migrant themselves. So yeah, but true, we're not living in the globally. We are.
My name is Tisa. My point of view is about the red line about immigrant workers in Indonesia. The red line is about poverty, lack of knowledge, discrimination in Indonesia. About women is so impacted. I think become a housemaid. I think a housemaid imported from Indonesia are considered as vulnerable because it's affected by conditions that give rise to the vulnerability. The women in equality, poverty, and lack of knowledge, they will vulnerable to trafficking, even as a housemaid, import to Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, and then they become a dead body. And I would like to you, Miss, what kind of strategy that can reduce gender trafficking, especially for women? Thank you.
Well, it does seem like this is the migrant labor issue is one that is huge in the sense of both locally within countries and then globally across. And the question of the poverty that is part of the base of the reason for the migrant labor to begin with That is a huge challenge to any nation, but to also global politics. So the International Labor Organization is in the process of really trying to demand certain rights for migrant laborers, and particularly for domestic workers, because domestic labor does not fall within a lot of the purview of what is considered public regular labor. So we're back to the question, though, of the particularness of this labor, because historically it has been done by females, and now it is being relocated through new systems of gender. So that's the process, and I think that some of the initiatives that have started just about trying to change the laws so that there are actual laws to protect domestic migrant laborers is a first step. But the real issue here is the poverty that pushes people into jobs that one would not normally choose, particularly in terms of migrancy, to leave your home to find work. So.
Yeah, okay. The poverty, and then the changing of the nature, and then the lack of natural resources, then the global climate has forced the informal sectors of the economy being invisible, not given the right, not given the protection. More response, please. Yes.
From Kapal Perempuan, I'm one of the associate of Kapal Perempuan. The similarity of migrant workers in US and also in Indonesia, that I can call it, there is a problem of poverty actually. Because for example, when I was in New York last year, I saw many Mexican actually come across the US, go to New York for example, and then 2/3 of the New York residents are Mexican actually, or the colored. Then also, but the problem when I see it, they have a very strong network among the NGOs for domestic migrant workers. Then at that time, the mayor has been issued the kind of a deal for domestic migrant workers, which is actually very different with Indonesia. We have a problem of, there is no actually, because US is recipient countries, but here in Indonesia, we are ascending countries. We send the migrant workers, mostly domestic migrant workers, to Saudi Arabia, for example, and there is no network, there is no NGOs network there to protect them. At the same time, our government actually has a very big problem to protect them. So this is important actually to see how the system that you call, there is the new system of protection for migrant workers actually emerge for US. But to some extent, I do understand we have very different complexity issues, because US to some extent is a I call it developed countries, developed or developing? Developed countries, and then Indonesia is developing countries. So it's very complex, and TNC mostly are from the developing countries, and I think US contributes a lot for TNC, and we are mostly, quote unquote, I can say survivor for that, and then I do understand to some extent you use your quote-unquote colonialism perspective to see the problem of Indonesian migrant workers. But the similarity that we also have under the fundamentalism U.S. has a Christian fundamentalism government, and to some extent we also have a problem of Islamic fundamentalism. So how do you linkage actually between the fundamentalism, DNC, and also the movement of migrant workers there? Because that's very important. There are so many, I call it Islamic groups there, and it's across U.S. And that it's interesting how they actually has been treated by the U.S. government. Perhaps, I know you have a very strong perspective on racism concept. I think you can actually share to us, because we also have a problem of racism issue, because we are Asia, and then we send our migrant workers to Saudi Arabia. They use their perspective also on racism to Asia. Thank you.
Particularities that really, particularly the idea of a receivership, and sending, which does give you a different capacity for protection or not, or for organizations right on the ground for workers in that situation. I'm not quite sure what the issue was about the Islamic and the radical right part. I mean, clearly we have a very active radical right in the United States at the moment. I haven't really seen them very involved on this particular issue. They are all over women's issues, but not the issue of migrant labor. And I think you need to understand too, though, that there are many people saying that the third world is in the United States. So this idea that first and third world are totally separate, that's not to say that these are the same issues. I mean, but there are, I just think it's so important at this political moment for us not to see sameness, but to see similarity. And in that, to try for migrant workers organizing in the United States to learn from Indonesian, activities and the particularities here that can inform elsewhere, so that the dialogue goes both ways, always. Thank you.
Yes, please.
My name is Tunggal.
Sorry. Yeah. My name is Tunggal. I'm from Kemang. I just wonder, did you also make a kind of research that compare or do you have, do you find any other patterns between the so-called socialist country and this liberal democratic country in terms of this gender and trafficking issue? Whether their perspective is different to see this, or any other patterns that perhaps you can see from this.
Well, on the whole, trafficking, which is so tied to the question of sexuality and the sexual division of labor, if you're looking at those two questions, none of the political categories that make sense on that question. It cuts through. So the normal concept of liberal democratic or socialist, communist, those are all terms that are defined in relationship to everything but the sexual division of labor. Political categories are not on the basis of anything related to sex or the body. And that is one of the difficulties of being able to speak politically about gender.
But in terms of trafficking?
In terms of trafficking, trafficking goes, what I was saying is trafficking goes across political borders. There is, trafficking does quite well in former socialist countries, or, that there has not been a real difference in terms of what I've seen.
So you have just said that patriarchy is remasking the face in the global economy. So actually the patriarchy, what she has just elaborated a minute ago, is still there. And even the misogyny, the gender story of misogyny is still there within the global economy. More response. Yes, please.
Hi, it's me again. I just want to quickly comment what Professor Eisenstein said. She doesn't know that right-wing politics in the US have got anything to do with trafficking and migrant worker, because there is. Because in the state of Arizona, they're doing this crackdown on so-called people of color for any kind of stop and checks to check whether they're citizens of the United States. And it's supposedly a crackdown on undocumented workers in the state of Arizona. So they're very, very strict on whoever who is not white, they will check whether they're undocumented. And also in the state of Alabama, migrant workers are also having a hard time to find work. However, undocumented women, particularly from Mexico, can work as domestic workers. So that's very strange. So I just want to add a comment there. And it's very much right-wing politics that's perpetuating this racism and how it's linked to migrant work in the US. Thank you.
Yes, well, of course, the point, though, the question was about sexual trafficking. So, and absolutely, I think that it is important to show the connections between race and sex and gender always. Because everyone with a sex has a race, so there's no way that you can talk about one without the other. But I do think that the right wing in the United States on the question of sexual trafficking, they actually, all of their politics on sex is very contradictory. So, but the way that then it comes back on the question of migrant and the white privileging of it is absolute.
Some of the questions I had are the same with others, but if this is the last, Zillah, you called yourself a feminist and an anti-racist, and here we usually thought about the feminist as a person in action. I mean, the one who are not only a theorist, but who are also in action. As a person in action, usually people have a kind of answer, even though in the beginning you said that this is so complex. I mean, I try to understand the overall of your thinking. It's very intriguing, but I have to say that I don't get all the. Of course, I haven't read your book, and there are some missing links for me. But to try to understand that you're talking about you said ruling narrative. Maybe means modern global capitalism, in which it is heterosexual compared to the traditional, which understand more ideas of genders. So in the ruling narrative, which is modern heterosexual, there are new ways or new actions of free gender and degender, as you say, and I think this is intriguing and it's still more not very clear for me. But it shows that the whole construction these days is difficult to understand. It's so complex that you said that it's difficult to know the meaning. But at least as a feminist or as an activist, do you have any answer, whatever temporary or feeble it is? I mean, when you say when you give example about how for the first time in the United States, men lose their job and women becomes the majority in the working force, what does it mean for you? And when you say in Islamic states, the government try to veil their women, and it is because a woman's body is the site of power, but what does it mean for us to understand? What does a site of power then? How we is it? Yeah, I mean it's how does it mean to you?
In this particularly, I think that this is an incredibly difficult, disparate moment of politics all across the globe. But are there multiple movements where people are struggling and fighting, you know, whether it's against global warming or it's against or trying to bring an end to wars or working against, you know, the extraction of goods out of Congo. There are multiple moments that people are completely involved in. Many of the anti-racist feminists I work with are, you know, located in multiple different sites because there is not a unified movement. Now, in the United States, there, of course, is the Occupy movement that has really started to mobilize people across the U.S., trying to stand for what they say are the 99% as opposed to the 1% of the wealthy in the United States. In that movement, though, there have been feminists who have taken sites and said, we need to occupy patriarchy. It's not just occupy Wall Street, okay? So the point here is that the way that politics kind of grows to try to become more inclusive, it seems to me that if you're asking me my politics at the moment, it is to try to see as much and be as inclusive as possible to the variety of struggles to make this a habitable world, you know, which must be against war and must be for saving this environment and must be for finding ways to be creative with our humanity. So now, you know, can we list all of them, you know, different things that people can do? Sure. But, you know, also the whole movement of the Arab Spring, although many activists, particularly in Egypt, said, you know, only our revolution would be called a spring. You know, they said, don't, you know, this is not a spring. This really is a revolution. And as we all watch and see what is happening in Egypt right now, interestingly enough, 3 weeks ago, the remobilization for democracy in Egypt was really led by women in the streets there, with the largest demonstration that has been in Egypt since 1916. Tens of thousands of women demanding the military step down and to create a real democracy in Egypt. That struggle is far from over. So the struggles go on, you know, and that's what politics is, you know, you engage where you can. So at least for me, you know, and I wish that there were a unitary answer at this time.
Probably Ayu is not the last. More response? Wonderful. Okay.
My name is Januari from Google.
Sorry, you have to use the name, your name and institution. We record it.
My name is Januari from Google. Just ordinary people. My question is simple. So, what do you think about the libertarian classic feminism? Because I got the issue from this lecture. We got the conclusion about the neoliberalism and some strategy to against the title of the neoliberalism, but there are the movement from the feminist perspective. It means the repression of the individual right, and I don't know, it's something to deny the gender issues or mean it the regender or something. So what do you think about the libertarian classic feminism? That's it.
Well, if I understand your question, I mean, normally it's thought of as liberal feminism, right? Is that what you meant, liberal feminism?
I think libertarian, not with the text, the title is the equity feminism. It's something like, I think there are two exponents, and that people is from US also.
Is what?
From US also.
Yeah, right. Well,
they don't use the neoliberal, but they use the libertarian classic.
Yeah, well, if you're saying libertarian and neoliberal, I mean, we could, you know, I don't think they're exactly the same, but either way, neoliberal feminism, it seems to me, has, at least in the United States, has been horribly problematic because it has been really at the base of authorizing much of the wars that we have been involved in, particularly in Afghanistan and Iraq. So, but there are many feminisms across the globe, and I would say liberal feminism, although it is often with the political narrative given the most space, that there are really insurgent feminisms today that are the most hopeful for a real democracy.
Like the libertarian classic premise, it is. So if you have the individual right to think, to choose something like, you know, when we talk about how to remove the prostitution, is something like the economic condition is crisis, that the woman as a victim. But how the legal prostitution, if it is right, something like to get the livelihood and something. So how to think that mean the equal position, and in Indonesia is mostly the prostitution is illegal. But so how it is it's being like the individual right or to become the prostitute. That's it.
Well, I'm not sure I quite followed the question, but the issue of legalizing prostitution, is that what you're?
The main theme of the libertarian classic is the individual rights.
Yeah, right.
So,
yeah.
What do you think about the woman to think to choose the become the something like to survive of the sexual?
Well, libertarianism is not a sufficient analysis to me on any level. So definitely not for women or men or for humanity. So.
Professor Eisenstein, this question is sort of provoked by your earlier statement about something that I haven't heard before, about the fact that from 2008 until just recently, the majority of workforce in the US is female and not male. I just read yesterday in the website, The Progress, something that is kind of, I'm not surprised by this, by the way, but I just want to sort of kind of know what your take on this. It's that in the US, the survey, there's a study that says that
women, of course, we all know that got paid a little bit less than men, 81 cents, I think, to $1 for men. But when it comes the time to ask for raise, equal number of male and female asked for raise and promotion. And unsurprisingly, of course, more male got the promotion and raise, and fewer female who asked for the promotion or the raise got them. The thing that really got my attention from this study is that they also said that female who asked for raise or promotion actually got a little bit stalled in the career later on. It seems that the probably I should say aggressiveness that is displayed by asking for promotion or raise is not really is not awarded. So I was just want to ask what your opinion on this, if you have any take on this. It seems like, from my point of view, in this case, female just can't go right in this. It seems like when we just we're not getting awarded appropriately, and then we're getting stalled later on. So because of asking for what I think we deserve. So yeah, that's.
So what we also want to do is find new ways about thinking about what some of these structures are. And the idea that I think that some of the old ways of practicing misogyny really are outdated now. And there are new forms, and so we need to be really trying to track those to be able to see what they mean and change those.
Can I comment on that?
Yes, for sure. Yes, for sure.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah, I guess I understand what you're saying. It's just that since this particular study is pretty new, they just released it, and I'm not pretty sure which organization actually conducted the study. Judging by what you also said earlier about more women are now in the workforce, I don't know if that's...
Well, that's actually been reversed, I
said.
Okay.
Yeah,
it was only in 2009, just this last 6 months, it is, there's a lot of transitional happening about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Indonesia we are more women working, but then the question is occupying which class, occupying which place, and they also receive the least of the pay. So they occupy the middle class, and they also receive the least of the payment. More response. We still have 30 minutes. Yes, please.
I just would like to comment about back to the issue of migrant workers and the trafficking. It's the issue of migrant workers or trafficking. It's very complicated because it's many layers we have to see into it. For example, the first issue, because it's connected to the domestic realm, where the society here in Indonesia, the job in about the domestic is not recognized as a formal job. Even though everybody, maybe here, middle class here is very spoiled. Almost every middle class here use PRT here, domestic workers. But in some way, still, as mentioned the guy before, it's very cultural. So until now, domestic workers is still not recognized as a formal job. And in the broader issues, when the state recognize domestic jobs to become selling point to the receiving countries like Hong Kong or Arab, but in some ways still never didn't recognize as domestic job. That's why still very complicated to see the problem. even ourselves, when we talk about the domestic job, we still debate. Oh, because we have culture that sometimes we have we mentioned culturally we have tradition, have pengasuh, nanny, and then turn into the other generation still using that same nanny. I think one of the main problem here, the first is we have to recognize domestic job as formal job. I think in U.S. country, in developed country, domestic job, it's already very rare. Maybe you don't have domestic job in your home, but here everybody almost have domestic workers. So the secondly also it's issue about the patriarchal system, that domestic realm still just women issue. It's like I don't know how to call it. It's very complex. So it's issue between how to recognize domestic realm as job, formal job. And secondly, how to understand the way segregation between domestic and public realm. This is still very difficult. So how you find this problem to cope? The main issue here.
Well, domestic labor, when it is paid labor, has of course a different standing than domestic labor that's unpaid. So that would be two important kinds of distinctions. And then the argument to say that domestic labor is a significant form of labor, whether it's being done within one's home or it being done in someone else's. So one of the struggles right now is to get domestic labor in terms of particularly women's migrancy more recognized in terms of laws that can protect it. So this is part of the process.
Yeah. Okay. Would you like to have three? No. Okay. Yes, please. One question. Yeah. The last.
Hi, Zillah. My name is Rico, and I'm Ithaca College, Ithaca High School alumni, actually not college. I don't have a smart question here, but basically about you mentioned about the Arab Spring. I was wondering if you can share a little bit about the role of women in people's struggle. Not so much women on the streets or leading the rallies or actually leading the movement, but actually the discriminations within the movement itself and sexism. Because I know from, for instance, during the old Timor days, the Timor struggle, a lot of women sacrificed their body for the both playboy and womanizing freedom fighters, and they kept quiet for the sake of the struggle. Is that kind of thing still happening everywhere, or is somebody doing anything about it, or what?
Women activists have been extraordinarily important in Tunisia and in Egypt and in Syria. That said, simultaneously, there has also been, incredible discrimination against them, both in terms of the military force, sexual abuse, but at the same time, it does seem to be, at least with the women that I've been in touch with in Tunisia and in Egypt, they say that that it is a fluid system of going back and forth. So the initial taking of the Tahrir Square, women in Cairo said that it was it was a revolution in and of itself that you had tens of thousands of women in the street and feeling free to be there alongside their brethren. 3 weeks later, when there was a women's march, there was huge amounts of sexual harassment against them. Then just recently, really to kind of re-spark the revolution, it was again primarily a women's movement that did it. So, but it is a hard struggle from everything that has been shared with me in terms of every one of the countries involved right now.
Okay, thank you. I have to say in bahasa for a while. Okay. Saya mendapatkan tugas sedikit untuk mensamarikan dalam bahasa Indonesia. Kalaupun salah, pasti teman-teman sudah ada pemahaman sebelumnya. Bahwasanya struktur ekonomi kapital global itu telah berubah. Bahwasanya telah lahir kelas menengah baru. Bahwasanya telah lahir proletar baru. Bahwasanya itu diisi oleh anak-anak perempuan kita, juga perempuan. Dan bahwasanya dalam struktur politik apapun, bahwasanya lagi patriarki jejak-jejaknya masih ada, seksisme jejak-jejaknya masih ada, ketidakadilan sangat banyak. Jadi antara Ibu Zillah dan antara kita di sini sebenarnya sedang bertemu, kita sedang rerasan ya, bahwa kita harus menegakkan keadilan, kita harus memperjuangkan perlindungan, kita harus memberikan hak-hak mereka, dan itu semua dengan menggunakan kreativitas kemanusiaan kita. I've just summarized that actually in this session we meet because they are activists and they are also academicians and also personal who in the name of their own self who also fight for justice, who also feel the imprint of patriarchy, the imprint of misogyny, the imprint of sexism, the imprint of the lack of right and protection of the transnational migrant workers. We are very grateful for your being here. We get extraordinary knowledge and also variety of dictions, and that's for sure enrich us. Let's give her applause.